Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are, welcome again to another Talk Architecture podcast. I'm your host, Naziaty Mohd Yaacob. This is a continuation of the introduction to sensorial design, which is the previous episode. And this topic today is called Sensorial Design and Neuro-architecture. The thing about neuro-architecture, there is a combination of neuroscience and architecture in which we are more conscious in a way to be less conscious. This is like a movement for mental health and well-being in architecture, designing for people's well-being when you do architecture, not for just fantastical design that looks good, but in terms of functionality, it sucks. So it's very, very broad, where this movement in terms of putting the user first when you design something comes from other architecture, like digital architecture. Information technology, or the design of devices from the group of user interface and user experience, like smartphones, obviously. So this consciousness of designing for unconsciously using a device like a smartphone, second nature. You don't have to think too much about it. There is pros and cons to that, obviously, when you are relying on the device. But hey, using the smartphone as an example is a bit controversial or a bit more loaded. But say any device, a chair, a table, space, a dining room, living room, kitchen, toilet, or bathroom. So say any space, and say that the issue of safety is out there, is very important, that you feel safe when you're using the space. Some sort of security, some sort of belonging, feeling good, and able to perform what you need to perform in that space. So we have that in barrier-free design, we have that in universal design, and we also have it in sensorial design. Now, people may think that sensorial design is a subset or smaller than neuro-architecture, but in actual fact, it's like a Venn diagram. Sensorial design and neuro-architecture is kind of like have a subset, two circles together, and where the subset is to be helping with the sense of well-being of a human being in the building. So the subset is to do with mental health. And that is how the relationship of sensorial design with neuro-architecture. Now, we keep on defining this thing, because when you define it properly, it becomes something useful rather than just a series of proposition and assumptions of come from different disciplines. When they combine neuroscience and architecture, obviously it's through the mind. And I get some of the conversation. I get what they are coming from. We've listened or watched a few videos on YouTube about this. We also do our research in the internet to find more about this. And if you look at Arch Daily, magazine or in their website, you can see attempts at making sensory garden, attempts at making architecture that is trying to get you to be interested in the architecture and then give you a sense of pleasantness when using like a park or benches or space outdoors, space inside. Sensorial design came from the need to have calm rooms. So architecture does play a responsibility or have the function to make people feel better, to make people feel safe. And that is one of the thing that is not really being researched well, that's not really being practiced well when designing something, which is pure speculation. So the need to be creating less commercial oriented, less of speculative development, the role of the architect to be much more specific and localized rather than being too generic, leaving it to the computer to generate the spaces. It's necessary to put like brakes on. The brakes on, hey, hang on, what are you doing? You're repeating stuff, repeating designs, and these are designs that did not work before, and you're getting people to live in units that are not flexible or that are not adaptable for the future. You talk about the facade or you talk about the building being green, but you're not really looking at functional architecture or architectures to do with sensorial design or neuro-architecture and so on. A lot of these keywords are being discussed by the architecture fraternity in the fringes, not necessarily with star architects. Star architects still need to talk the language of form, or talk the language on a narrative to suit with their clients' ideas, what it is needed to be created in cities in the world. So there are architects that are talking about sustainability, but sustainability becomes something that is just to appease society, but the impact that you have with architecture for the user, for the specific user, is something else that there's no impact really in terms of these issues that was presented by a certain, what's the name here? A lady called Fiona Binkans in a TED Talk where she talked about neuro-architecture. There were 3 pillars that she explained. The 3 pillars are, with regard to neuro-architecture, you need to organize the space better so you feel more safe, more secure. You have to use the right colors. Black ceilings is something that she said that made the mood gray or make people depressed. As a contrast, she talked about how you feel light when you go outside and you see blue skies. So some of the examples that she gave in the TED Talk called How Neuro-Architecture Will Change Your Well-Being is TEDx Geneva by Fiona Beankins. It's really interesting, eye-opening talk. And the 3rd pillar is the ego has to go. It's the person himself, the approach or the way the designer approached design. So it's kind of generalized, and I don't think she wants to make it too specific, and architects to figure out themselves what neuro-architecture is about. She explained about how, excuse me, the well-being of a self is necessary. And then the well-being of others when it comes to being a designer. So architecture is powerful. Architecture can determine your mood. Architecture can inspire you. Architecture can make you feel safe, secure. Architecture has a role to play in how you make or break somebody's well-being. And well-being relates to mental health. It can make you more stressed out, especially if architecture is not soothing, it's not able to accommodate to the needs of stress relievers. So good enough that we come into this point where we're seeing sensorial design and we're seeing neuro-architecture having commonalities, and they go back to the basic definitions of the categories of disabilities, of people with disabilities, the physical and the mobility limitations, a group which has those issues, and then they have the sensory disabled persons, people who can't see or have problems with their sight, people who can't really hear well or have problems with the hearing, and other sensory issues such as taste, smell, and touch, and also a spatial sense and the extreme sense of sensory perceptions and sensations such as too loud, too bright, too noisy, and so on, that autistic people or those on the spectrum has, and they are included in the group that is called intellectual disabled people. I mean, this is like, there's a whole load of spectrums going on. I mean, human being, they are complex, and you have to do with functionality, physical, physiological, the ability to use your arms and legs and brain and everything, is like a very complex organism. And to suit human being into how they would function well in architecture is kind of like an ongoing thing. And people would argue we got this sorted long ago and just follow Christopher Alexander pattern language, for example. He thought about all these situations, spaces in a city or a public space or a living room or kitchen or nooks and corners and alleyways and street environment. And why not we just follow those sensible, shall we say, guidance, and we could get architecture to be more functional and more correctly organized, or best organized. That's what Miss Fiona Bean-Ken said. So actually was talking of similar things, and some things become more general, or some things are much more talked about in a personal way, compared what Fiona said to what I said. If I coming from the disability issues perspective, for example. So we come to the conclusion here that sensorial design and neuro-architecture has similar things going on, and that we could expand on the definition of sensorial design, adding in neuro-architecture pillars, for example, organization of space, colors, and get the ego sorted with regard to the designer. We usually don't do the last one, but it makes sense. It makes sense that you need to design more for people rather than for your ego and trying to make it look good, but it's not that functional. There's something that need to be said, and who are the ones having the ego? It's not necessarily just the architect. It's the person who commissioned the building and thought the building as a statement or a signature rather than the functional aspect of it. So with that, I'd like to finish this episode of Neuro-architecture and Sensorial design and the relationship and the similarities. Thank you very much.